On October 2nd, 2001, at airports across 4 continents, Swissair ground crews received an instruction that no airline employee ever expects to hear: stop fueling the aircraft. The Swiss national carrier, an institution so synonymous with reliability that the Swiss themselves called it the Flying Bank, had run out of cash. Approximately 39,000 passengers were stranded worldwide. Aircraft worth billions sat locked on tarmacs from Zurich to New York to Sao Paulo. Pilots who had reported for duty that morning discovered mid-briefing that their employer no longer existed in any functional sense. The parent company of Swissair had accumulated over 17 billion Swiss francs in debt. A catastrophic acquisition strategy had drained every reserve. And when the financial shock of September 11th removed the last oxygen from the room, Swissair simply stopped breathing. For a quarter-century since, Swiss aviation has accepted a painful truth. Switzerland is, by almost every measurable metric, the single hardest country in Europe to operate an airline. The labor costs are the highest on the continent. The country has no domestic market, barring flights between Geneva and Zurich. Yet, Swiss International Airlines, the carrier built from Swissair's wreckage, generated 502 million Swiss francs in operating profit in 2025 and has been one of the most stable profit drivers in the Lufthansa Group. However, in 2025, that operating profit collapsed by 26.6%. Operating margins fell. It grounded its entire fleet of 9 Airbus A220-100 aircraft and started harvesting their engines just to keep other planes flying. It offered cabin crew 15,000 Swiss francs each to voluntarily resign. So, why does Switzerland break every airline that would thrive anywhere else? To understand why Swiss operates on razor-thin margins despite charging some of Europe's highest fares, you need to understand Zurich Airport after dark. Zurich enforces a strict noise curfew. Commercial flights are banned between 11:30 p.m. and 6 a.m. And that 11:30 cutoff is not a suggestion. It is absolute. The window from 11 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. exists only as a pressure valve for delayed flights, and even that narrow grace period comes with punitive financial surcharges. Starting in 2027, the airport will impose higher noise charges for louder long-haul jets and for flights departing or landing after 11:15. Consider what a hard 11:30 p.m. closure means for a long-haul network airline. A single thunderstorm over Frankfurt at 9 p.m., a mechanical delay on a widebody arriving from Chicago or Shanghai. Any of these routine disruptions can cascade into Zurich after 11 p.m. And when they do, the airline faces a binary choice: land the aircraft in the remaining minutes or divert it entirely to another country. There is no third option. There is no extension request. The airport closes. Deviations from noise-optimized departure routes trigger formal investigations. Pilots can be summoned for interviews. Over 53,000 residents around Zurich Airport were classified as heavily noise-impacted in 2023, exceeding the permitted threshold of 47,000 by more than 6,000 people. The airport has paid 87.8 million Swiss francs in cumulative noise compensation. It installs soundproof windows in at least 200 properties every year. Community pressure groups representing over 80,000 affected residents actively lobby for further restrictions. The regulatory environment isn't softening, it's tightening. Geneva, Switzerland's second airport, faces parallel constraints. The direction is unmistakable across Swiss aviation. For Swiss, this creates an impossible scheduling puzzle. Hub airlines depend on connection waves. Passengers arrive on short-haul flights from across Europe, connect through the hub, and depart on long-haul services. But connection waves require time, and time is exactly what Zurich's curfew eliminates. Every evening bank of connections must be completed before the airport shuts. There is no overflow capacity, no midnight departure to absorb delays. Airlines at Heathrow or Frankfurt face similar curfews and restrictions, but Zurich does not have what the other two have. Most European network airlines supplement their intercontinental hub operations with a thick mesh of domestic feeder flights. Air France funnels passengers from Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Nice, and others into Paris CDG. Lufthansa collects traffic from Hamburg, Berlin, Stuttgart, and other German cities into Frankfurt and Munich. These domestic routes are often low margin individually, but they are essentially plumbing. They fill long-haul cabins. Swiss's only domestic route? Zurich to Geneva. This means every single passenger on a Swiss long-haul flight must be sourced from either the Zurich catchment area directly or convinced to take a train to the airport. There are no domestic feeders to top up load factors on a long-haul flight. To compensate, Swiss partnered with Swiss Federal Railways to build the air rail network. As of 2026, this system integrates over 20 destinations across Switzerland and Germany into Swiss's booking system, allowing passengers to reserve a single ticket directly to their intercontinental destination via Zurich Airport. It's an elegant workaround, but it is a workaround. The fundamental disadvantage remains, and the competitive geography makes this worse. Zurich is surrounded by megahubs. Frankfurt sits 300 kilometers north, Munich 310 kilometers east, Milan-Malpensa is just south across the Alps. Passengers on Switzerland's borders can choose 4 or 5 alternative hubs within a few hours of ground travel. Without domestic flights to lock in demand, Swiss must win every passenger on product quality, schedule precision, and fare competitiveness, competing against hubs with vastly larger natural catchment areas and far more forgiving operational constraints. But those megahubs in Frankfurt and Munich, all part of the Lufthansa Group, which Swiss is also a part of. If a passenger does not like what Lufthansa has to offer via Frankfurt, they can book a single ticket on a Swiss flight to, for example, Newark. Swiss labor costs are not merely high by European standards, they exist in a different category entirely. Swiss labor law, social expectations, and the sheer cost of living in Zurich make ultra-lean staffing models impossible. The airline competes against carriers whose crew costs are literally a fraction of its own. This disparity extends beyond the cockpit and cabin. Ground handling, maintenance, engineering, and administrative functions all carry the Swiss cost premium. Every mechanic, every dispatcher, every gate agent costs more than their counterpart in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, or Madrid. The currency amplifies the problem. Swiss earns a significant portion of its revenue in euros and dollars, but pays its workforce in Swiss francs. When the franc strengthens, revenue translated back into the home currency shrinks, while costs remain fixed. It's a structural headwind that no scheduling optimization can solve. As if structural disadvantages weren't sufficient, Swiss is currently navigating the most severe aircraft reliability crisis in its history. The Pratt & Whitney PW1500G geared turbofan engines powering the Airbus A220 fleet suffer from lower than expected time on wing. The global supply chain has failed to produce enough replacement engines, maintenance providers cannot turn around aircraft fast enough. For Swiss, the impact was devastating. The airline operates 30 A220s, 9 of the smaller A220-100 variant, and 21 of the larger A220-300, facing a situation where engines were failing faster than replacements could arrive. Swiss made an extraordinary decision. It grounded its entire A220-100 fleet in late 2025, all 9 aircraft, and began cannibalizing their engines to keep the 21 A220-300s operational. This wasn't a temporary measure. The grounding extended for several months, and some of the A220-100s have now returned to service. 9 aircraft, representing a full third of the A220 fleet, converted into spare parts warehouses. Despite every disadvantage, despite the curfew and the costs and the grounded aircraft, Swiss remains the most profitable airline in the Lufthansa Group, and it isn't close. In 2025, Swiss posted an operating margin of 9.3%, generating roughly 630 million euros in operating profit on 6.4 billion euros in revenue. The flagship carrier, Lufthansa, managed an operating margin of 0.9%. Eurowings achieved 4.3%, Austrian Airlines 3.2%, Brussels Airlines 1.7%. The significance of this disparity isn't about Swiss's management skills, and it isn't really about operational efficiency. The only viable strategy is radical premium differentiation. Swiss must charge more, and it must justify charging more. This is why the airline is investing over 1 billion Swiss francs annually in its Swiss Senses cabin product and Airbus A350 modernization program. The premium cabin is the only economic engine that generates sufficient yield to cover Swiss labor costs, Swiss airport charges, Swiss noise surcharges, and Swiss franc exposure simultaneously. The scarcity of options is the strategy. Limited capacity due to curfews creates exclusivity. High costs force premium positioning. The absence of a domestic market forces aggressive international yield management. Switzerland's constraints don't just shape Swiss's business model, they are the business model. The airline is pursuing productivity gains through digitalization, lean crew rostering, and faster turnarounds, not because these are innovative concepts, but because in Switzerland, the margin between profitability and collapse is measured in minutes at the gate and francs per passenger kilometer. There is also this to consider. Swiss consumers can afford to pay a premium for air travel, propping up Swiss's results. Most European airlines look at Swiss's premium pricing and assume they could replicate it by upgrading their own cabins. They are wrong, and the reason reveals something fundamental about competitive dynamics. Swiss's brand authority derives directly from the constraints it survives. Swiss precision, Swiss quality, Swiss exclusivity are not marketing inventions, they are byproducts of an operating environment that permits nothing less. Meanwhile, the structural pressures are intensifying, emissions trading costs are rising, airport charges are climbing, engine manufacturers cannot deliver reliable power plants. Every competitor watching Swiss sees a carrier trapped by geography, regulation, and economics. What they miss is that the trap is also a moat. No low-cost carrier can profitably base operations in Switzerland long-term. EasyJet Switzerland exists, but it operates under the same cost structures, the same curfews, the same franc-denominated expenses. In 2001, Swissair collapsed. The airline purchased stakes in Sabena, AOM, and other struggling carriers, hemorrhaging capital to build a network that geography denied it. The strategy was desperation dressed as ambition. It cost over 17 billion Swiss francs in accumulated debt and the livelihoods of tens of thousands. 25 years later, Swiss represents the complete opposite. Not an airline trying to escape its constraints, but one that has learned to weaponize them. The premium positioning, the radical product investment, the air-rail integration with Swiss Federal Railways, the relentless focus on yield over volume. Every element of the strategy exists because Switzerland left no other viable path. The airline still generated 502 million Swiss francs in operating profit in 2025, under conditions that would bankrupt most European competitors. The question isn't whether Switzerland is the hardest country in Europe to run an airline. That much is obvious from the curfews, the costs, the grounded engines, and the absent domestic market. The question is whether the rest of Europe's airline industry understands that Switzerland's conditions are precisely what makes Swiss so difficult to compete against. The constraints that should have killed it are the same constraints that made it the most profitable carrier in its group. The question isn't whether Swiss aviation can survive its operating environment, it's whether the rest of Europe is really paying attention to what that survival actually means.